here in China, obviously, air quality is a very important topic. What role can tall buildings specifically play in combating China's air quality crisis and similar air quality issues around the world?
Sure. So, I mean, you're exactly right. Air quality is a huge issue in China, and I think tall buildings can play a role in that the kinds of technologies that they can deploy are really going to be really turning the industry on its head. So, in other parts of the world, issues like natural ventilation has been often used as a means of reducing energy consumption. So you're pumping in lots and lots of fresh air into the space. In a market where you have, or an industry or a location where you have air quality problems, you really don't want to be doing that. You're going to be having to look at ways of how you can treat that air, to filter that air, and to be recycling that through. So we're seeing a lot of buildings that are coming up with very, very high-end technology, the sort of air filtration equipment that you might see in a hospital being applied to an office scenario. The way that I look at it is that when it comes to buildings, there's really two sides of this. It's a supply and demand issue. So a lot of what I do is focusing on energy reduction and on reducing environmental impacts. But if you can address that at the head end from a supply side, so if I can green my electricity generation and move more quickly towards solar and wind and other technologies like that, it doesn't mean that I can have an inefficient building, but it does address a large part of the issue when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions.
Do you think a net zero skyscraper is even an attainable goal?
Well, we know that net zero is already happening now at a smaller scale. A net zero building is not one that doesn't use any energy. It's one that uses a lot less energy, and then it either generates its own supply or it uses renewable power. So the first thing you need to be doing is saying, well, what can I do to make my building as efficient as possible? So in large part, we know the answer to that question. It's the same sort of techniques that we've been using in smaller buildings and less complex buildings. We're just doing it on a much larger scale. Having said that, I'm not necessarily sure that tall buildings are really the major focus here. So what we have seen, and this isn't in the context of a net zero building, but what we've seen in the past is that the pendulum really swung out to the side when it came to green technologies. So there was a race towards LEED Platinum and other rating tools in other markets. And what that meant was that plenty of building operators and designers were over-investing in technology which wasn't really matched for that building. So when I look at green buildings, I'm constantly asking that question of, is this a technology which is adding to that building in the long term? Is it something which we're going to look back on and say that was a great decision? Or is it something we're going to look back on and say, you know what, maybe we went too far. Maybe we over-invested in that and we needed to back that off a little bit.
How has green building changed in China over the past 5 years?
Sure. Well, I think China is really learning very, very rapidly. So in the past, it's been the case that property operations teams and designers may have looked elsewhere in the world, to the US, to Australia, to Europe, about what are the latest trends in sustainability, what are the things that we should be doing. I think now, and very much so in the years to come, we're actually going to be looking to Asia to say, well, this is the home of tall buildings. This is the place to go for that kind of knowledge. And in some ways, that can be an export commodity for Asia and for China.
And as you look out 10, 20 years, probably a lot of the innovations will be things we can't think of right now. But what trends maybe occurring now or starting off now are most interesting or exciting to you when it comes to tall building design?
Sure. Well, in fact, I would actually say that it's not just a design
and development.
I would also include existing buildings. They were probably built in a period where sustainability was not as important, where energy costs may have been lower, where the knowledge in the industry was not quite so great. So going in and looking at these buildings, there's a great opportunity to improve them and to bring them up to modern standards. Can they compete with a new project? That's something that the industry is grappling with right now. And partly that's because they want to reduce costs and they want to have a great tool to engage with their tenants. But they're also competing. They're competing with these mega projects that are coming out of the ground now or in the next few years. So their tenants, they're acutely aware. They're acutely aware that their tenants are looking at these other projects saying, do I stay or do I go? This new building may have nicer features and more amenities and closer to train lines and, the latest architecture. So the existing buildings need to work extra hard, or else they're going to be finding that they're losing tenants. And sustainability is one of those key trends there. Air quality is another huge issue. I think that particularly in China, there's an awareness now that something has to be done.
Right.
And we can't change the world. We look after property, so we need to work within our own realm. But that's a pretty big realm. Property is responsible for about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. So, if we say we control roughly a third of the emissions that are going on, and we can reduce that, then that's a pretty significant impact.
What's something else that's on your mind lately, or that's been exciting or interesting?
Well, I guess one of the challenges that I am seeing is that although China is learning very rapidly and they are adopting some of the best practices from other markets, they're also repeating some of the same mistakes. So commissioning is the classic example. So first of all, the designers are coming through and making sure that that's designed correctly, but then making sure that's installed correctly and that it's going to operate correctly. So that, and it's all sorts of silly things that, fans can be connected up badly, or the BMS isn't pointing to the right things. So that when you come in, you're looking at information on a screen or believing the building is operating a particular way. In fact, it's not, and it's not because you're relying on information which hasn't been calibrated correctly. So that to me is one of the simplest things that can be done better. But it remains a challenge in the industry, particularly because of the tight construction timeframes. Because, if we start to see buildings that are designed with sustainability in mind, but don't operate as effectively as they could, people will lose faith in that. People will start to look at that and say, you know what, that was a nice idea, but it didn't really work. And it's coming back to those things about making sure that the whole system works as well as it can. We know how to design green buildings well. We know how to deliver them well, so let's do that well. And then let's operate them as effectively and as efficiently as we can. When I look at green buildings, we know how to do it at the top end of the market, but we aren't doing it everywhere. So therefore, shouldn't we be looking to plug those gaps? Shouldn't we be looking at those existing buildings or the lower grade buildings or that sort of thing and saying, what are the missing parts? We know how. Why aren't we doing it? And is that an incentive? Is it some sort of other government scheme like that? I'm sure there's a whole range of opportunities, but as an industry looking at that gap, that's how we're going to see the tectonic shift.